Thank you, Diane. The word heroine has had many meanings, and the woman who has borne the title has worn many guises. She has been a damsel in distress, waiting for rescue from the night in shining armor, a Valkyrie riding on air, leading her troops into battle, an artist alone, painting bones in the desert, a tiny nun healing the wounds of the poor in Calcutta, and a supermom juggling briefcase and baby formula. She has changed the face of woman with each passing generation. The task of today's heroine is to mine the silver and gold within herself. She must develop a positive relationship with her inner man with heart and find the voice of her woman of wisdom to heal her estrangement from the sacred feminine, from the wisdom of insecurity. It is the advice, excuse me, of the Arabian Gnostic Monimus, who wrote, "Learn whence is sorrow and joy, and love and hate, and waking, though one would not, and sleeping, though one would not, and getting angry, though one would not, and falling in love, though one would not. And if thou shouldest closely investigate all these things, thou wilt find God in thyself, one and many, as the atom, thus finding from thyself a way out of thyself." Wonderful, and I can see you. Thank you so much, Jan. I beg your pardon. Allergies are still a part of our world up here in New Braunfels Hill country. And Diane, thank you for the time that you gave me last week so we could rehearse this and feel a little more comfortable about presenting. I'm delighted to be back. I've enjoyed every time that I've had connections with all of you, even some of the writing retreats that we did in the evening a year or two ago. But for this morning, and I'm just going to record the time off my digital clock so I can keep track. I'm interested in the poetics of the Bible. I'm interested in it as an epic, along with the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid and Beowulf, because it unfolds the myth of an entire people. So I think Moses has something to tell all of us about incoherence and coherence. We may have already found ourselves moving through the world and we come to a burning bush, but it doesn't consume itself. Out from its benevolent flames emerges a voice. I want to entertain this morning that voice is the voice of coherence. Recall for a moment with me the second book of the Old Testament, Exodus, which we are told is the record of Israel's birth as a nation. But as we read it closely, we see that such a birth requires an antecedent. And that antecedent is the birth of Moses himself. And it arrives in the form of a voice, first in the appearance of an angel of the Lord, who appears to him in a flame of fire in the midst of a bush. Now, we could call that a miraculous flame because it doesn't consume what it's engulfed. I can go with that, but I want to add that it is a mythic flame, perhaps even the presence of the flame of myth itself, because it is the flame of awareness, of presentness, and it appears just off the path that Moses is walking as he herds his sheep. but he really has no purpose yet. So the flame is no longer following the dictates of nature's law, but introduces another world's format. It's the flame that arouses curiosity, that stops one in one's tracks to ponder mystery itself. That's why I think it's the flame of myth. Stay with a myth long enough, and its finger will point you towards mystery, the ineffable, even for what Joseph Campbell calls the transcendent. So here's what Moses says: I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why a bush is not burning. Now, I think this is a threshold moment for him, because he enters, perhaps for the first time, what the Greeks called a temenos, that is, a place of the imagination, like a cloister, a place where one can hear and respond to one's own destiny. So Moses turns to look at the bush burning, and now God's voice calls to him from the midst of it. Moses, Moses, and he answered, here I am. Now, we can puzzle over why God calls him twice. Are there, at this instance, two Moses? The one who is about to perish, and the other one is about to begin a new life, unfolding his own myth. Nonetheless, God tells him he has come to deliver his people out of Egypt, to a land flowing with those archetypal wonders, milk and honey. Then God calls on Moses to be the instrument of this divine plan. I find Moses's response to God as rich as is milk and honey. And he asks, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? And then he repeats it. Who am I? Who am I is crucial, for he does not know. For being called is a moment of instrumental import, when one is willing to be an instrument of something that one is called to do. Such a yielding, myths show us, often leads to a fuller sense of one's self-identity. Joseph Campbell reminds us that when the hero heeds the call, he or she makes an act of will to give oneself over to something beyond the self in that vocation. So it's a vocative moment. Being willing to be instrumental, but not incidental, is the crucial instance of yielding that originates the formation of a coherent life. So in Exodus resides the shards of Genesis. Coherence is the byproduct of a destiny. Destiny is the occasion of a willing response to something outside yourself, and at the same time is the noblest impulse within yourself. As out there, so in here, to paraphrase Heraclitus. So initially Moses asks, who am I? Which brings into question his entire complex identity, to which God tells him, and I think this is an interesting point, what to do, not how to be. And God says, gather the elders of Israel together. Tell them you will bring them out of the affliction of Egypt to a land of Canaanites and others. So to be called, the story intimates, may be to heal a wound, or an affliction, or an injustice. One's orbit expands out of oneself to embrace others. I think that in that act alone is a profound liberation from self-absorption and from personal needs and desires. So God continues by telling Moses, they will heed your voice. But Moses' doubts end stops his acceptance of the calling, and his resistances are intensified. But suppose they'll not believe me or listen to my voice. Suppose they say, the Lord hasn't appeared to you. The Lord then offers Moses a sign. He tells him to drop on the ground the rod that he's carrying. It immediately morphs into a serpent. Moses picks that serpent up by the tail, at which it suddenly turns back into a rod. So this is the second instance where the laws of nature are suspended and another set of laws govern. Moses then finds another excuse to avoid the call. But I'm not eloquent, neither before or since you've spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. Something new opens here in this vocation. Precisely where Moses believes he is deficient is the exact soft spot in himself he must enter to create a coherent life through freeing his people. It signals his destiny. In other words, his vulnerability signals his destiny. I just think this is a profound moment in the story. Any journey into the world is simultaneously a pilgrimage into one's own interior. Joseph Campbell observes repeatedly in working world mythologies. He sees it across mythologies. I would italicize here that vocation is a form of a vacation. Here's why. One is called to vacate one's own plans or one's own self-absorption or fear-based hesitation in order to enter the spirit of another, in order to expand one more plausibly into his or her full nature, which occurs when one has enough heart, from which we get the word courage, to relinquish it. Now we are deeply enmeshed in the terrain of myth. Where our soft spot is, where we feel most vulnerable, marks the territory we must step into. Destiny does not often play to one's strengths, but to one's vulnerabilities. Part of the reason that a true calling is so transformative is its insistence in pushing us to confront the less vital, more imperfect aspects of our being. Moses' fear overcomes him at this moment. Lord, please send someone else by the hand, I beg your pardon, of whoever else you may send. The Lord now grows impatient with Moses' deflection of his destiny and continues to persist. He calls up Moses' brother Aaron. I know he can speak well. He comes to meet you. Now you shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth. This resistance and then compromise with God has a comic sensibility about it. And I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and I'll teach you what you shall do. Now, from mouth to mouth is a mythic move. Now, I realize I'm jumping from the Hebraic to the Greek world in what follows. In Greek, muthos, M-U-T-H-O-S, means mouth, and it's the origin of the word mythos. So anytime we open our mouth to speak, we're exhaling our muthos. I don't care what the topic is. If we allow this jump to the Greek etymology of the word myth, then what we speak to another is always co-heard. In the process, one's own muthos coheres in the hearing. No matter what we say or how we say it, our lexical landscape is brought into performance. We note that Moses' brother Aaron is to be Moses' mouthpiece, his spokesman. So the following equation emerges. God is to Moses becomes Moses is to Aaron. So as Moses is God's instrument, so Aaron becomes Moses's instrument. The divine human coherence is now replicated or mimed, M-I-M-E-D, in the human conjoining. As the Lord observes, so he shall be your spokesman to the people, and he himself shall be as a mouth for you, and you shall be to him as God. I mean, the complexity of this, we could spend 2 hours unpacking. So what are we to discern here? To be called is not an act of isolation, even when it takes place in solitude. It is more one of communion or of communitas, in the word of the anthropologist Victor Turner in his marvelous book, The Ritual Process. We are beckoned or summoned into elevating ourselves beyond our self-imposed limits. I believe that to be called is not only vocational, but fundamentally an act of faith, to which each of us is required to make a leap. Quote, and Aaron spoke all the words, that which the Lord had spoken to Moses. Aaron echoes the words of God that Moses heard and related to his brother. And I began to think perhaps Aaron's own calling to his own destiny occurs at the same time. Because one's being called may not be a private event, but it may often, and maybe always, involves others. Maybe part of all of our own callings involves a beckoning into relationships with others. Our calling is not only to a content of doing, but to a context of being, and then further out of being in relation.